Hi, and welcome to this episode of HxGN TV, and I'm genuinely delighted to have with us today two of our utilities and communications product managers of Karen Bachmeyer and Mike Baker. So thanks for coming along and spending this time to share some of your insight with us.
Thank you.
Happy to do it.
And let's get stuck in. Today's topic is the UNC's new products offering, Intergraph NetWorks. So we'll find out a little bit about that. But before we do, you get to speak to a whole range of customers around the world, lots of different sectors: water, gas, comms, electricity, pipeline. We get a feeling there's a lot of change in the market. Do you see there's any commonalities across the regions, any commonalities across the sectors? What are the really big things driving the customers?
Oh, absolutely. Probably the biggest thing that we see is that more of the utility companies are getting smarter customers. The customers are demanding more. Used to be, if you looked at the 20th century, customers are rather passive. They simply paid their bill. Now we see customers being more active, wanting to know how they can conserve electricity, perhaps buying devices for their homes that will help them conserve electricity. So what we wind up seeing is that the utility company has really gone from being kind of market-driven to much more customer-driven and customer-focused. And with that, intentionally or unintentionally, you would see data be put into a silo. And so you may have a group that has a wealth of information, but they're not sharing it to other organizations. Or perhaps the data had to be translated. So as the data got moved from one department to another, it had to go through a process or physically be touched. And so what we see with networks is, or what we saw the need for networks was that you had these utility companies who were being demanded by customers to be a little bit more active, to share data, but yet not really have a mechanism to do that.
Okay, no, sounds good. So it sounds like they're having a lot of pressure on them, they're being forced to change. Does anything, Karen, anything change what you have to do in the product center in terms of planning the products, what the scope is, how they work compared to the traditional sort of client-server applications?
Well, I think it goes to not only is the consumer really changing their outlook and their perspective and what they want and the deliverables they want from the utility, but internally, we're in this instantaneous, I need it now. Why is it out of date? Why can't I get it on my phone? Why can't I get it tomorrow? You have to be able to react, you have to meet the business drivers, and you have to accept agility and mobility in everything that you do. So it's really an influencer for us to think about how best can we take the wealth of information that's in the asset network and make it available in a multitude of formats for the consumers and for the business people within the utility organization.
Okay, so it's coming from a point functional solution to something that's much more ingrained within the enterprise.
Absolutely. It is all about enterprise access. It doesn't matter who you are. If something about the asset network helps you do a better job, then that's how the utility becomes more efficient by leveraging that data.
And it used to be that data, that network data, was held very tightly by the engineering group. But now, for example, the real estate group, the planning group, the environmental group, they all need access to that information. And so having that to be readily available is one way for them to reduce their costs, but also encourage this collaboration between groups as well.
Okay, so that sort of leads us into Intergraph NetWorks. We've mentioned this is the really major product launch for Hexagon Safety and Infrastructure in the utilities and communications space. How does that talk to that issue of getting that data more out into the organization, more integrated with the processes, and breaking it out of that engineering silo?
So I think the first thing you notice is that instead of the data actually being read by some desktop application, it's actually a service. And so now you have a service that takes the information from your database, from your G-Technology data, and then provide that as a picture or as an image or as attributes, but you wind up being able to use a web service to communicate. And I think the web service gives you the opportunity to be much more current, to be able to have that data readily available at your fingertips.
But it's also control and diversity. So the web service can honor certain permissions So I don't have to worry about, you don't know how to operate the client application. It better be intuitive. We have to think about that in terms of usability of the client application. But the programmer or the product can be configured to say, these users have this access in a client application, a browser that takes no administration. So that's part of that quicker to meet the demands, because you don't have to worry about how am I going to roll out the software, how am I going to train the users. No, it has to be intuitive and it has to be readily available.
Okay, so that sounds like quite a departure from the traditional model of trying to get things further out there, the mobile GIS, the web mapping applications. How do you see NetWorks differentiating itself from that? I mean,
I think one thing is that you've already made an investment in your data. You've already set what the style should look like, what the symbology should look like, who has access to that. A lot of times in the web mapping application, you'd have to duplicate that effort. You'd have to redo your symbology, you'd have to redo your styles, redo who has access. You've already configured it once. And so NetWorks allows you to automatically take that configuration and push it to whoever it may need, who may need it. So if you're finance or your environmental people, if they're used to seeing the data this way, it's already configured. If your field people are used to seeing the data this way, it's already configured for them. So one aspect that makes it different is there's really no need to set up any extra data for how it should be displayed. That's automatically honored, right?
Right. We're mining and doing things that traditional mashups, if we go back to thinking about web map mashups, where they just presented pictured layers, well, that was it. You couldn't select something. You couldn't say, well, tell me the history of that. You couldn't do that. And so now with NetWorks, we drill into that picture, which is, as Mike said, very much exactly how you've set your industry, your organizational standards. And so we can drill in, mine the information, give you the history reports, let you make corrections if you know that you have an error in the system, which really opens a breadth of opportunities to make that data more accurate and more valuable to the organization.
And then one other thing I would add is that we're very used to web mapping applications showing the geographic data, right? Everybody shows the geographic location of the facility, but with NetWorks, you can also view details. So if I've gone through and I've built a detail for a switchgear, or I've built a detail for a regulator station, or a detail for a substation, those have no geographic knowledge. They're just basically a blueprint or a schematic, if you will, but yet NetWorks can publish that information as a service. And so when I want to be able, if I'm in the field and I want to go in and make sure I can throw the correct switch, which is a huge safety issue, I can actually view the detail or the schematic of that substation or that switchgear assembly, so that I know I'm actually going to operate the correct device. So not only is NetWorks a geographic web mapping application, but it also provides the details and schematics, which is a big differentiator as well.
Okay, so it's more the inherent functional and informational richness of the network model as opposed to a simple map publishing tool.
It's more than a picture, but that picture is still worth 1,000 words.
Oh, that's great. And can you see any initial examples of applications, functional areas where customers could deploy this and realize benefits by having access to the live information directly where they wouldn't have had it before?
Sure. I'll give you one. We have several, but one that comes to mind is every organization has that one person that has to do all the special requests. So you have a government agency or a local agency ask for a map, and you have one person who has to stop doing their job to fulfill that request. Here, all they simply do is to give the URL of the data to that requesting agency. Immediately, that person sees the benefit of not having to do that extra job. So one aspect is saving that time. Other ones are when we go to do inspections in the field, you can actually wind up making changes. If I'm in the field, I should be able to look at that pole and see the attachments.
Right.
And go ahead and add them versus transcribing them into paper or whatever to bring them in. So we really see a lot of maintaining that data quality.
Absolutely. And talking about inspections, taking pictures can help the more senior engineers who might be having a team of younger engineers come in, they can take the pictures, they can understand the situation that the new people might not have, right? And they can provide the history. That picture becomes a long-term record for the utility of this is a state that it was. I didn't just arbitrarily check yes. So they've got those legal records to show it. They can do a more thorough job, and they can save time in their inspections too. And that's important because they have to meet the regulatory requirements of timed inspections, right?
So you're more completely fulfilling the business process, not just creating a data record.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's great. And I mean, we've had version 1 launched. What do you see as the next things on the horizons for the product? Are there any new features or functions, or where do you see it going?
Well, Mike mentioned that we're talking about details and schematics, which is huge. If you've got details and manhole and substation diagrams, you need those to complete the operating picture, but also adding the trace analytics so that you can get that, get me to the open switch, get me to the fuse, and again, pinpoint problems, do network analysis, can I support the load, and do that through a thin client that again enables many more users within the organization.
Okay, so not just a topological trace, but really functionally how the network's operating.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Cool.
And then one thing that's coming is, when we start moving to mobile devices, everybody wants speed and performance. So one of the things in 1.1 is being able to do a tile service. So now instead of actually having the server generate the image and send it, you can actually create what we call a tile WMS or WMTS, which will provide that data near instantaneously to the user, because no map has to be generated. It's already been generated and it's a tile. So now you're seeing data at the same speed you see Google, Bing, and all the commercial map products as well.
I was just thinking with Google and Bing, are there any applications where the customers could maybe access some of the data?
Oh, absolutely. We had a huge storm in the Huntsville area and lost our power for a week. And you can do that map of estimated restoration, right? This is where the outage is, this is how it's coming online, and see that change through there. You could also know about planned outages if they're going to do construction in your road, and what to watch out for. So that can go through the consumer space, and then also answering customer service requests for, can I add gas service to my house? What would that cost me? So they can be more proactive in providing more service to their community.
And then the one thing I would add is, when we looked at adding these web services, we could have made a choice to select some proprietary format, some format with our own custom API, but we chose rather to use the OGC standards. So now if someone uses or looks at the OGC standard, they suddenly have our services can be gone into any framework such as open layers or leaflet, or they can actually use the OGC specs to write their own functions to make a request to retrieve their own data as well. So not only do we provide this data as a service, but it's also a service that is an open standard that anyone could program against.
That's great. Well, I think that gives me a fairly good idea about the statement that it's extending the reach and the value that it can deliver to the organization, and really a good insight there. Thanks for sharing the time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to Hexagon TV, and we'll catch up with you soon.